Hugo kissed Lucia's hand, his lips trailing gently down her fingers. The unexpected touch made her flinch, her face turning red. "Your Grace?" she stuttered as he guided her to lie down. "My name," he corrected. "Huh?" She blinked, confused. "I don't want to be addressed by titles in bed. Call me by my name." Lucia hesitated. "Your name?" Hugo raised a brow. "Don't tell me you don't know it." "Of course I do," she answered quickly. Hugh?" Her cheeks burned as she spoke. He studied her expression, his gaze unreadable. Just now, that look in his eyes, Lucia thought. "Maybe I'll call you Hugo," she murmured. "No," he rejected immediately. "Huh?" She looked uncertain. "I liked what you just called me." "Hugh?" she repeated. Instead of answering, he pulled his robe aside and leaned in. "Vivian," he said calmly. Lucia fidgeted with her fingers and thought, "It's just... I rarely get called by my name. I'm not used to it." "You will be," he said, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Vivian?" She blushed, momentarily speechless. "You're more headstrong than you look, you know," he remarked with a soft grin. "I am not," she protested. "Yes, you are." "Then what does that make you? You always demand unreasonable things," she shot back. "That's because I'm always right," he said, leaning in before kissing her. He pulled away briefly, their eyes locking before he kissed her again. When he finally broke the kiss, Lucia was breathless. "Breathe through your nose and put your hands here," he instructed, guiding her hands to his neck. "Oh," she hesitated. "Don't worry," he assured her. "It won't hurt much." "And if it's my first time?" she asked, but he didn't answer. He held her hands, kissing them gently. "Relax," he murmured. Before she could fully process his words, she gasped as he moved. "It hurts," she whispered, her body tensing. "Shh," he soothed. "I've only just started." "Huh?" Lucia's voice wavered. As he moved, his thoughts drifted. Has it been too long since I've been with a woman? Or is there something different about her? Each time I touch her, I lose myself. Her scent, her smooth skin, her voice. She makes me feel as if I'm in a dream. As if all the nights before this were meaningless without her. And in that moment, he gave in completely. In the quiet of the night, Lucia woke, her body heavy with exhaustion from their earlier intimacy. As she turned, she found herself beside Duke Hugo, peacefully asleep. The realization of her marriage brought a sense of security, yet the lingering sensations from their night together made her blush. Feeling parched, she attempted to rise but faltered, her legs weak beneath her. The soreness reminded her of the physical toll, making her wince. She hesitated, noting that she was clothed, dry and covered, unlike how she remembered before falling asleep. So this is married life? She thought, the experience both bewildering and overwhelming. Books never mentioned how much it would hurt, yet if asked, she knew she would say she liked it, just not enough to endure it again so soon. The intimacy embarrassed her, yet a quiet intrigue lingered. As she struggled with her thoughts, Duke Hugo stirred, his gaze falling on her as she sat on the floor. He frowned. "Why are you there?" Lucia, startled by his voice, flushed in embarrassment. She couldn't understand how others seemed to enjoy this so easily. Was she the only one struggling with it? Before she could respond, Hugo knelt beside her and lifted her effortlessly into his arms. Lucia looked around in confusion, noticing the empty bed. I just needed water," she stammered. "Yes, it's your husband," he said, responding to her dazed expression. The word husband still felt unfamiliar, and she found herself fumbling with the weight of it. He teased her about falling off such a large bed in her sleep, but she quickly corrected him, explaining her thirst and weakness. Without a word, he carried her to fetch water, handing her a glass. Lucia accepted it bashfully, mumbling a soft, "Thank you." "Don't break it this time," Hugo teased. Her face burned as she drank, recalling her clumsiness from before. "He's mean for making fun of me," she thought, but she couldn't bring herself to be annoyed. Once she finished, he returned her to bed, pulling the blankets over her. "Get more rest," he told her, his tone gentler than she expected. Lucia hesitated, then reached out, brushing her fingers against his face. He raised an eyebrow. "Your hair is tangled," she murmured, not realizing how softly seductive she looked in the moment. Hugo stilled, his restraint cracked. Without a word, he leaned in, capturing her lips in a slow, lingering kiss, his hands gliding over her body. A warmth spread through Lucia, unfamiliar yet oddly comforting. She gasped softly, overwhelmed by the sensation. Lucia let out an unsteady breath, but before she could speak, a sharp pain in her chest made her flinch. Hugo immediately noticed his brows furrowing. "Does it hurt?" he asked, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. Lucia bit her lip, embarrassed, but nodded. Tears welled in her eyes. His expression darkened with concern. "I'll call for a doctor in the morning." "No, I'm fine," she protested, uncertain how to explain the discomfort. Hugo wasn't convinced. "We'll delay the trip north." Lucia sat up quickly, shaking her head. "You said it was urgent. I can endure it." But unbeknownst to her, the urgency of their trip had been a fabrication. Hugo had no pressing matters in the north, only a private wedding ceremony he had planned to avoid the grandeur of a public one. He had never intended to tell her. "A few days won't change anything," he said, leaving no room for argument. "Rest." Lucia looked at him, surprised by his tenderness. The man she had once feared now showed a side of him she hadn't expected. As he tucked her in, she hesitated before asking, "After our time in the north, will you return to the capital?" Hugo didn't answer immediately. "I have a lot to take care of there," he admitted after a pause. "I don't know when I'll be back." Lucia lowered her gaze. Lucia studied his face, then asked, "Have you ever regretted a decision?" Hugo's response was immediate. "No." He spoke with certainty. Dwelling on what's done is pointless. Lucia clenched her fists beneath the covers. She admired his resolve, but at the same time she wondered, did he never look back? Never second guess? And if so, would he ever look back at her if he left? She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, lost in thought. "I should go so you can sleep," he said. Lucia, still lying on the bed, blinked drowsily. "Aren't you going to sleep more, Your Excellency? It's still early." "I usually wake up at this time," he replied. Then, with a hint of impatience, he added, "And I told you not to call me that." Lucia nodded. "Right? I'm not used to it yet. I need to practice." Hugo studied her for a moment before suggesting, "Vivian, you should also practice not flinching when I call your name." Lucia hesitated. "That name feels strange to me," she admitted. "Princess Vivian feels like someone else," she thought to herself. "But I still have to call you something," he pointed out. Lucia bit her lip. "Can't you use something else?" Hugo smirked and leaned in slightly. "Wife, honey? Darling, my love?" He listed each one deliberately. "Sweetie, my sunshine, soulmate?" Lucia flushed, averting her gaze. "Which one do you prefer?" he pressed. She sighed, still blushing. "Just, Lucia is fine." "I like Vivian," Hugo countered, watching her reaction as he sat beside her on the bed. Observing his relaxed demeanor, Lucia thought, "He's definitely a playboy." She had hoped he didn't keep mistresses after marriage, but she couldn't be sure. Hugo, unconcerned with her thoughts, brushed his fingers over her hair. "Enough talking. Get some rest," he said, lightly patting her. Just as Lucia closed her eyes, she hesitated. "One more thing." Hugo narrowed his eyes. "I told you to sleep." His look made her pause. Lucia chuckled at his frustration, amused. He sighed. "What is it now?" "How many hours of sleep do you usually get?" she asked. 3 or 4, he answered casually. Lucia's eyes widened. "That's all? I'd probably die if I only slept that much." Hugo shook his head. "No one told you to do the same. Sleep as much as you need." Satisfied, Lucia closed her eyes. "Okay." A beat of silence passed before she murmured softly, "Sorry for keeping you up." Hugo stilled for a moment, watching her peaceful face. He leaned in and brushed a light kiss against her cheek. "You didn't bother me at all," he whispered. He wasn't sure what it was about her that intrigued him so much. Maybe it was the way she had grown up outside the typical royal life. Or maybe it was those clear eyes that held no trace of deception. Yet. But even those eyes, he mused, one day they could change. Before he could dwell on it further, footsteps approached. Fabian entered with an urgent telegram. Hugo's expression darkened as he read the message. "I should have been careful what I wished for. Now there really is trouble in the north." He exhaled sharply. "I've been away too long, but how could they be this reckless?" Fabian remained silent as Hugo crumpled the paper. "As long as they know their place, do I not treat them fairly?" His voice was cold. No one dared to answer. "Send word to the north. I'm coming," Hugo ordered. "I'll take this opportunity to inspect the land." Before leaving the manor, Hugo turned to Jerome. "Escort Lucia and call for a doctor." Jerome hesitated. "Is the lady unwell?" "No," Hugo replied. "But if she wakes up and says she needs one, make sure it's a female doctor." Jerome blinked in surprise but nodded. As Hugo mounted his horse, he glanced back. "Treat her with respect," he instructed, then rode off. Jerome watched him disappear into the distance. The Lady of Terran, he wasn't sure what to make of those words. Am I reading too much into this? He exhaled. I suppose I'll find out soon enough. Roy returned to Duke Hugo's mansion, frustration evident on his face. He can't do this, he muttered repeatedly as he walked through the corridors. Upon entering the guard room, he repeated, he can't do this. Why aren't you with the Crown Prince? A guard asked. Ignoring the question, Roy grumbled. Who cares? I haven't agreed to that yet. This brought back a recent memory. I'll leave a trusted guard with the Crown Prince while I'm in the north, Duke Hugo had declared, scanning a scroll. Roy Croton, you'll fulfill your duty. No, Roy had objected. You will, the Duke insisted. No, Roy repeated, just as stubbornly. I want to go too. Why should I be the only one stuck in the capital? Roy had protested like a child denied a treat, causing a scene. The Duke had simply sighed before delivering a swift blow to silence his complaints. Back in the present, Dean Hiva, one of Duke Hugo's knights, advised, The Duke has given his orders. You should return to your duty. Still sulking, Roy mumbled, I heard there's trouble in the north. I'm going to miss out on all the action. Dean Hiva shook his head. Action? That's what you call it. It's better than following the Crown Prince around all day, Roy muttered. Dean Hiva warned him. If the Duke catches you sneaking off, you're done for. Roy smirked. He wouldn't kill me. Maybe just give me a beating. Dean Hiva sighed. You always test your limits with the Duke, but this time, I don't think you'll get off easily. Changing the subject, Roy asked, Why are you still at the manor instead of traveling with him? I'm escorting the Lady North, Dean Hiva explained. Oh, right. The Duke got married, Roy recalled, then admitted, I don't know much about noblewomen, so I'm a little uneasy. Roy smiled as he remembered his first encounter with Lucia. You'll be fine. Dean Hiva raised an eyebrow. Have you met the lady? Not really, but I have a good feeling about her, Roy said confidently. Dean Hiva chuckled. All right, I'll trust your good feeling. Now, drop this and get back to your post. If the butler catches you... He suddenly stopped mid-sentence, noticing Jerome standing behind Roy. Unaware of Jerome's presence, Roy sighed. Jerome is scarier than the Duke sometimes. Thank you for saying that, Jerome interjected with a faint smile. Roy flinched, caught off guard. Meanwhile, Dean Hiva made a quick escape, leaving Roy to face Jerome alone. Sir Roy Croton, Jerome said, his tone calm yet firm. In the distance, screams could be heard. Lucia woke up later that day, still feeling a lingering ache in her body. As she tried to gauge the time, a knock came at the door. A handmaiden entered and asked if she would like breakfast before resting further. Lucia requested something light, which the maid quickly went to prepare. Curious about the Duke's whereabouts, Lucia asked. He left for the north early this morning, the handmaiden informed her. Lucia was surprised. He had departed without a word. Shortly after, the handmaiden mentioned that Jerome wished to speak with her. Lucia agreed to meet him after her meal. When they met, Jerome asked, How are you feeling, my lady? He then relayed the Duke's message, assuring her that she could summon a doctor if needed. Lucia, however, declined. So the Duke has already left for the Northern Territory, she asked. Jerome confirmed, explaining that an urgent message had arrived from the north. He noted that despite being left alone so soon after the wedding, Lucia didn't seem upset. When will we be leaving? She inquired. Tomorrow, Jerome replied, adding, But the master said there's no rush. We can leave whenever you're ready. Lucia didn't hesitate. Let's stick to the plan and leave tomorrow. Jerome was slightly taken aback by her eagerness, but nodded. If you're ready, I can go over the travel tales now, he offered. Yes, please, Lucia responded. Impressed by her composed demeanor, Jerome smiled and began his explanation. We'll depart from the capital and head north to Roham, Jerome informed Lucia. Roham isn't just the name of the city. It's also the name of Duke Terran's castle, he added. He explained that traveling by the main road would take much longer, but using the gates would reduce the journey to about 4 days. Lucia's expression wavered between joy and sadness at the mention of the gates. The kingdom of Xenon owes much of its power to these gates, Jerome continued. They were left behind after the fall of the ancient kingdom of Mado, and allow objects to be transported across vast distances. Xenon possesses more of them than any other kingdom. Since they're embedded in the earth and can't be moved, they give us a significant advantage. Jerome then asked if Lucia had ever used a gate before. She admitted she hadn't. He went on to explain that it would take about half a day to reach the capital gate from the mansion. From there, they would travel to the northern gate and then take a carriage to Roham, which would take another 3 to 4 days. There are only 5 gates in the north, so the one closest to the Duke's castle is still a fair distance away, Jerome concluded with a reassuring smile. Lucia nodded. Right. But Jerome, I thought not just anyone could use the gates. I was under the impression they were restricted to official business. That's true, generally speaking. Aren't they only for official travel? Jerome confirmed. Yes, but the capital's gates can be used for a fee, and in the Duke's case, if he wishes to use them, no one would dare refuse. Lucia was taken aback. Though she knew Hugo was important, it was only now that she was beginning to grasp the extent of his influence and the fact that he was her husband. Do you have any other questions? Jerome asked. No, your explanation was very clear. Thank you, Jerome, Lucia said with a smile. You're very welcome, he replied. After a brief pause, Jerome carefully broached another topic. My lady, if you're feeling unwell and unable to travel... Lucia looked slightly flustered, but cut him off. I suppose I should see a doctor, shouldn't I? Later that evening, a doctor was summoned to the Duke's manor. They called me early in the morning and kept me waiting the entire day, the doctor thought as she followed the handmaiden. She suspected the patient must be a difficult noblewoman. The handmaiden knocked on a door before announcing the doctor's arrival. As the doctor entered, she was surprised to see a young woman waiting for her. The person I was so nervous to meet is just a delicate young lady, she thought. She had expected someone more demanding, but instead, she found herself examining a gentle duchess. After administering treatment, the doctor left the room where Jerome was waiting. How is her condition? He asked. There's nothing to worry about, the doctor assured him. Her muscles are just sore. With proper rest and medication, she'll recover quickly as long as she avoids strenuous activity. Jerome nodded. I see. Have you considered my offer to become her personal doctor, Anna? Anna hesitated for a moment, thinking about Lucia. You said I wouldn't be leaving the capital permanently? That's right. You'll return in a couple of years, Jerome confirmed. With a calm expression, Anna agreed to the arrangement. By the next morning, everything was ready. As Lucia approached with her handmaidens, Jerome greeted her. My lady, are you feeling better? Yes, I'm fine. Thank you for your concern, Lucia replied. This way, my lady, Jerome said, leading her toward a group of soldiers. Before we depart, let me introduce you to your guards. All right, she responded. As she stepped forward, Lucia took a deep breath. We're finally leaving, she thought to herself, feeling both anticipation and uncertainty. Lucia was greeted by the leader of the guards assigned to protect her. It's an honor to serve you, my lady, he said with a respectful smile. We will do our best to ensure your safety. Thank you, sir. I feel safe with you, Lucia responded warmly. The guard leader then advised her to stay close to Sir Heva in case of trouble. Curious, Lucia questioned him. Why should I stay with Sir Heva and not you, the leader? He explained that Sir Heva was the most skilled among them. This piqued Lucia's curiosity further. Then why isn't Sir Heva the leader? She asked, knowing that leadership in knightly ranks often depended on ability rather than status. Her question left the guards momentarily speechless. The leader hesitated before Sir Heva spoke up, revealing that he was of common birth. However, Lucia appeared indifferent. So? She responded, unfazed by his background. Sir Heva hesitated before explaining, I thought the lady might be uncomfortable. You assumed I would be displeased if a common-born knight led my guards? She asked directly. He confirmed her assumption with a nod. Without hesitation, Lucia made her decision. I would like Sir Heva to be the leader, she stated firmly. She cared more about skill than social rank. Sir Heva was taken aback by her request, but she reaffirmed her stance. Skill should outweigh status. I don't intend to break any knightly rules, but I believe ability should be recognized. Seeing her determination, the guards bowed in agreement. Yes, my lady. Jerome, observing the exchange, smirked. I didn't realize the lady was so familiar with knightly traditions. I thought you might feel uneasy, but it seems I worried for nothing. Lucia chuckled softly as she walked beside him toward the carriage. Along the way, Jerome shared a surprising detail. Sir Heva is exceptionally skilled. He was knighted immediately, skipping the usual training period. Lucia raised an eyebrow. But only those who win a fencing match or a horseback competition earn that right. He must be truly remarkable. Jerome nodded, then smiled. I'm more impressed by how much you know, my lady. Lucia simply smiled, her thoughts turning inward. There's a reason for that. As the carriage rode off, her expression turned solemn. Staring out the window, she mused, Yes, there is an explanation. That evening, the group stopped to rest. After the camp was set up, Jerome informed Lucia that the area was secure. It's dark, so watch your step, he cautioned as she stepped outside. Noticing her pale complexion, he felt a pang of concern. Thank you, Jerome, Lucia replied tiredly. He admired her resilience. This journey must be exhausting, yet she hasn't complained once. Anna, the family doctor, also noticed Lucia's exhaustion. My lady, if you're unwell, would you like some medicine? She asked with concern. Lucia shook her head. I'm just tired. But thank you. She briefly wondered why the Terrans had a doctor from the capital instead of one from the north, but let the thought pass. Later, as they walked quietly, Anna noticed Lucia's distant expression. She wanted to speak, but hesitated. She seems lost in thought. Lucia, meanwhile, was deep in memories of her dreams. She recalled running a small workshop that repaired weapons for knights. Those days had been fulfilling, even though she had lost everything to a charming con artist. Despite the loss, the memories were precious. She then remembered working as a maid for a noble family, saving her wages to buy a small house and live peacefully after leaving her job. Looking up at the vast night sky, she reflected on her journey, from her dreams to her present reality. I never imagined I'd be here. I've come so far. Truly, very far. Known as the Northern Kings, the Terran family ruled with an unspoken agreement that even the king would not interfere in their affairs. Despite their autonomy, they remained loyal subjects of the crown. The Terrans did not seek independence. They simply maintained their authority over the north without meddling in the capital's matters. 7 years ago, a major shift occurred when the former Duke Taran passed away, leaving his son, Duke Hugo, to inherit both the title and its responsibilities. Though young and inexperienced, Duke Hugo quickly proved himself on the battlefield, earning widespread recognition. However, not all of the northern lords welcomed him. Among some nobles, resentment simmered. They doubted his ability to rule effectively, viewing him as nothing more than a skilled swordsman. Believing the Terrans had weakened, they saw an opportunity. If they joined forces, they could challenge Hugo and reclaim what they considered their lost rights. The Terrans maintained strict control over taxes and governance, preventing the northern lords from oppressing the people. While this allowed commoners to thrive, some noble families resented what they saw as restrictions on their power. Seeking to challenge Terran authority, they devised a plan, a petition to the king, signed by multiple nobles, demanding Duke Hugo's removal. However, their plot fell apart when Duke Hugo responded swiftly and decisively. In the aftermath, bodies lay motionless on the ground. Footsteps echoed through the halls as Count Brown, one of the conspirators, pressed himself against a wall, his body trembling. He had miscalculated. Duke Hugo stood before him, his piercing gaze revealing both anger and disappointment. Count Brown, frozen in place, saw the Duke in a new light. He was no longer a boy, but a ruler who would not tolerate betrayal. Blood stained Hugo's sword, and his voice was cold. I haven't cut out your tongue yet, he said, his stare unwavering. Count Brown stammered, Yes, Your Excellency. Hugo tossed the signed petitions onto the floor at Brown's feet. The sight of them made Brown's breath hitch as he fully grasped the weight of his actions. 7 years on the battlefield, Hugo said, his smirk carrying a chilling edge. And in that time, you've been preparing for this. Count Brown dropped to his knees, his voice shaking as he pleaded for mercy. But Hugo had no patience for excuses. Is that all you have to say? He asked, unimpressed. When Brown continued to beg, his words laced with desperation, Hugo did not hesitate. With a swift stroke of his sword, the plea was cut short. Elsewhere in the palace, one of the handmaids leaned over, retching as another patted her back. Are you all right? I'll live, she replied weakly. The two handmaidens walked through the courtyard, relieved to have arrived in Roham after the grueling carriage ride from the capital. Though the journey had been exhausting, they were in awe of their lady's composure. Despite her clear fatigue, Lucia had not uttered a single complaint. As they reminisced about how the knights admired their lady, they couldn't help but express their own gratitude. Lucia was kind and gracious, a presence they were proud to serve. Noticing the lively atmosphere, one of them watched as someone offered to escort Lucia to her chambers. "She's considerate of the servants," one handmaid murmured, feeling relieved. "We are fortunate to serve someone like her." As they walked through the palace, Jerome expressed concern for Lucia after the long journey. "The journey must have been tiring for you, my lady," he said. Lucia admitted it had been difficult, but pointed out that everyone had endured the same hardship. She then asked Jerome to ensure that everyone who accompanied them could rest properly, to which he readily agreed. He informed Lucia that her bath was being prepared and suggested she wait in her bedroom. However, Lucia expressed a desire to greet the Terran family first. Jerome initially misunderstood, thinking she meant the palace staff, but Lucia clarified she was referring to family members. At this, Jerome explained that Duke Hugo was the sole member of the Terran family, as the previous Duke and Duchess had passed away long ago. Lucia was surprised. "The only one? But he definitely has a son," she thought. She considered asking about it, but decided against it, assuming there might be a reason the Duke had not mentioned it. Instead, she agreed to Jerome's suggestion of touring the mansion after her bath, choosing to be cautious in her inquiries. As Lucia soaked in the warm bath, her mind wandered back to the Duke's son. Why was his existence treated like a secret? The thought lingered as she prepared to meet Jerome for the tour, eager to understand the situation. Jerome led Lucia through the first-floor hallway, pointing out the sitting rooms, conference rooms, and dining area. He also mentioned the garden, accessible from the dining room's back door. Lucia's interest piqued at the mention of a garden, but Jerome warned her not to expect much. When they reached it, Lucia was taken aback by its unkempt state. "Why is it in this condition?" she asked. Jerome explained that since the previous duchess's passing, no one had maintained it. Without a lady of the house, it became too difficult to manage, and rather than leaving it as an eyesore, they had simply abandoned it. "Did the Duke order it to be neglected?" Lucia asked. Jerome hesitated before shaking his head. "Not exactly," he said, implying that the Duke was indifferent to such things. As they returned inside, Lucia hesitated before stopping Jerome. "I want to ask you something," she said. "You mentioned that the Duke is the only member of the Terran family, but the Duke has a son." Jerome's expression remained neutral, but Lucia could tell he was pretending not to know. "You don't have to act like you don't know," she said lightly. "It's not something the Duke would hide from me." Jerome's surprise was evident. He had assumed the Duke would not share such information. Lucia continued, "I expected to meet the child when I arrived. Where is he?" After a pause, Jerome explained, "The young master is attending a boarding school. He was sent there long before you arrived." Lucia was relieved to hear that his absence wasn't related to her. "How old is he?" she asked. 8, Jerome replied. Lucia was surprised. He was older than she had expected. She then asked when he would return home. "I don't know," Jerome admitted. "He hasn't come home once since he left for school." Lucia was stunned. "Has the Duke visited him?" Jerome shook his head. "No, not even once." Lucia fell silent. The revelation unsettled her. Why had the Duke sent his son away? Did he not care about him? And if he was so distant from his child, why had he agreed to their marriage? Sensing her unease, Jerome suggested, "If you wish to know more, it would be best to ask the Duke directly." Before parting, Lucia asked for the child's name. "Damien," Jerome answered. "Damien," Lucia murmured to herself, letting the name sink in. A mix of curiosity and understanding filled her thoughts as she processed everything she had learned. Jerome approached Lucia with a freshly baked pie, placing it gently on the dining table. "Here is a freshly baked pie, my lady," he said. Lucia's face brightened with delight. "It looks delicious." "Thank you," she said, appreciating his gesture. Jerome, ever attentive, advised, "Please don't eat too much, my lady. It might spoil your appetite for dinner." Holding her cutlery, Lucia mused, "Can't I just have this for dinner instead? If I eat like this every day, I'm going to gain weight." As she enjoyed the pie, she couldn't help but reflect on the lavish meals at the Terran estate. "If I keep eating like this, Won't I end up wasting the Duke's wealth? She wondered. Yet, despite her concerns, she found the pie delightful. Jerome observed Lucia's enjoyment and noted how the household staff had been kind and attentive to her, especially since she was newlywed. Lucia, too, noticed their consideration and wondered if it was out of concern that she might feel lonely or out of place. As she sipped her tea, she hesitated for a moment before gathering the courage to ask something that had been on her mind. Jerome, I was wondering, were you the one who sent the breakup roses? Jerome froze. Pardon? His surprise was so great that he accidentally dropped the teapot, spilling its contents and shocking them both. Lucia quickly reassured him. It's all right. The tea didn't spill on me. But her curiosity remained. Who had sent the roses? Jerome lowered his head slightly, appearing reluctant to answer. After a brief silence, Lucia reasoned aloud. His Excellency doesn't seem like the type to be meticulous about such things. I doubt he personally arranged for roses as a breakup gesture. Jerome hesitated before finally admitting, My lady, the thing is... He took a deep breath. Yes, it was on my accord. Lucia raised an eyebrow. Red roses for a breakup? That seems rather cruel. Not red, my lady. Yellow, Jerome corrected. Yellow? She asked, puzzled. In the language of flowers, yellow roses symbolize farewell, he explained. Lucia nodded, satisfied with the reasoning. I see. But how did you know that? You must be quite the romantic. Jerome shook his head. Not at all. I learned it from my brother's wife. She runs a flower shop. This led to a conversation about Jerome's twin brother, Fabian, who served as the Duke's aide. Lucia recalled having met him before and was surprised by the revelation. You have a twin? But you don't look alike, she remarked. Jerome confirmed. We are fraternal twins. Lucia was even more surprised. That makes quite a few sets of twins in the castle, Finn. The chef and one of the maids are also twins, aren't they? Before he could stop himself, Jerome added, The master, too. Lucia blinked. The Duke? Realizing his slip, Jerome tensed. Am I not supposed to know that? She asked. Jerome hesitated before finally saying, His Excellency had a twin brother, but he passed away long ago. It's not something people talk about. I would advise, my lady, not to mention it in front of the master. Sensing the weight of the topic, Lucia chose to move on. I see. Then about the roses. Who was the last person you sent them to? Jerome seemed relieved at the change of subject, though he still appeared uneasy. Was it Lady Lawrence? She asked directly. Jerome was taken aback. How did you? I found out by chance, Lucia replied casually. But if she was the last, then that means you didn't send any to Countess Falcon, the lady he was involved with afterward. Jerome hesitated before admitting, The Duke did not instruct me to send them. Lucia noted his reaction and speculated about the Duke's relationship with Countess Falcon. A hint of jealousy crept into her tone. Jerome, sensing it, quickly reassured her, His Excellency has not seen her since your marriage. A brief silence followed, but then Lucia suddenly burst into laughter. Jerome was startled by her unexpected reaction. I was just teasing, she said, waving off his concern. Thank you for answering honestly. Jerome bowed slightly, though he still felt slightly intimidated by her persistent questioning. Oh, and... Lucia started. Yes, my lady. Jerome responded instantly, making her pause. Why are you so jumpy? She asked with amusement. She then mentioned the maid assigned to her. I would like the maids to take turns attending me. Jerome immediately grew serious. Has the maid done something to offend you? Lucia shook her head. No, not at all. I just think it would be better this way, to avoid any conflicts among them. If one serves me exclusively, it might create division. Jerome was stunned by her consideration. He had expected her to demand strict service, but instead, she had thought of the well-being of the staff. For a moment, he simply observed her in admiration before finally smiling. I always thought I would serve only one master in this lifetime, but perhaps I will serve her as well. Bowing respectfully, he pledged, As you wish, my lady. Duke Hugo, seated in his court, faced Fabian's urgent pleas. Your Excellency, you can't just kill them all again. There's no one left to work. Fabian protested. Hugo remained unmoved, reminding Fabian to bring people from Roham. Frustrated, Fabian countered that Roham wasn't overflowing with workers. Just then, Elliot, the head of Duke Terran's knights, arrived with a prisoner, the heir of Count Brown. The young man, a scapegoat for his father's failed schemes, was thrown before the Duke. Rather than executing him, Hugo made a surprising decision. Leave him in charge of the place, he ordered, shocking Fabian. However, instead of gratitude, the prisoner begged for death. I hate this blood running through my veins, he cried. Hugo, unfazed, told him, if you lack the resolve to end your own life, then endure it. With that, the Duke dismissed him and left. Meanwhile, in a distant memory, two young boys lay in the grass. What's your name? One asked. Hugh, came the reply. The other, Hugo, noticed their names were similar. Hugh, however, was cynical. You don't even know what that name means. It means devil, he said. Still, Hugo was optimistic. I thought I was alone, but now I have a brother like you. Hugh, wary, warned Hugo of their grim fate. The old man will kill one of us. But Hugo, determined, declared, I'll protect you. Years later, however, on a winter night, their bond was tested. This is for you, Hugo, Hugh said, tears in his eyes, before sacrificing himself. Hugo, left alone, could only stare at his brother's lifeless body, haunted by guilt. Now, in the present, Duke Hugo sat in silence, lost in thought. As Fabian left him to his solitude, Hugo muttered to himself, I'm tired of this, bowing his head in exhaustion. Lucia grew curious about a locked tower within the Duke's palace. When she asked her handmaiden for the key, the servant hesitated, warning that the tower was rumored to be haunted. Dismissing the superstition, Lucia sought answers from Jerome, the Duke's trusted aide. Jerome admitted to the rumors, but explained that the tower had been sealed due to unsettling events. Pressing further, Lucia uncovered a dark truth. The former Duke and Duchess had been murdered. Jerome revealed that the Duke once had a twin brother who had been abandoned to prevent a succession dispute. However, the Forsaken twin returned as an adult and killed their father and stepmother. Fortunately, the current Duke was away at the time and inherited the title after the tragedy. Shaken by the revelation, Lucia couldn't stop thinking about the Duke that night. As she closed her book, she wondered if expressing her concern would bother him. A desire to comfort him stirred within her, leaving her to question whether her feelings were simply worry or something deeper.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the recap, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more manhwa content. See you in the next one.